So, okay, now it's recording. So welcome to the fourth session of the second Animal Law Researchers Clinic this year, this 2023. We have today, and this is my pleasure and honor, so to introduce to you our guest for today, Kathy Hessler, Professor Kathy Hessler, from George Washington University, and as a senior speaker, and Amy Wilson from Johannesburg University as junior speaker. Both of them have been in connection and have worked together in Oregon, in Lewis and Clark University, and both are now carrying new projects and also new initiatives, so for animals and especially for aquatic animals. This is very interesting, so let me introduce first our first speaker as a senior speaker, Professor Kathy Hessler, who is the Dean for Animal Law in George Washington University. It is a new initiative, and this is also a new branch of the law that with her started in George Washington University. And I think in George Washington University cannot find a better introductor as Kathy Hessler, because she has a very long career as a teacher, as a professor, and in teaching and also in researching. In fact, she was the first animal law teacher at all in the United States, and also has carried the initiative of publishing a lot of articles, a lot of papers, and also books, for example, the Nutshell for Animal Law. It's a collective book that is very important, and I highly recommend to you all. So to have a clear, precise build of what animal law is, not only in the United States, but all over the world. Kathy Hessler, Catherine, as so more formal, Kathy for all of us, we have had the privilege to meet her before, is introducing a new phase of the interest for aquatic animals. In fact, they both have started the World Aquatic Animal Day on the 3rd of April. This is the fourth year. Next year will be the 5th year. And this is shown, in fact, a long and very interesting initiative, I think. For most of us that have always thought that the most forgotten animals are aquatic animals, also insects, but aquatic animals. This initiative is the ground of a collective, I think, point of meeting for many of us who are interested in, as Cito, for example, interested in welfare of animals or in the legislation or in the protection of these animals. So the subject of her presentation today will be consideration of aquatic animals in legislation. And Amy Wilson will be talking about aquatic rights, intersections between aquatic animals and the interest of animals and humans. A very interesting point of interest, because I think that most of us, when we talk about biodiversity and protection of the seas, of the oceans, the aquatic aquatic biodiversity, we are thinking not in the inhabitants of this biodiversity. We are thinking, in fact, in the seas in themselves, but not in the sentient beings that are living in the seas, in the oceans. Then, so very welcome to you both. And if you agree, you can start, Kathy, please. 15 minutes your presentation, and then Amy, 15 minutes of her presentation. Thank you.
Okay. So everyone can see that all right?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you. I want to thank you for inviting me to speak. Looking forward to the conversation. And I'll be talking really broadly about sort of legal frameworks for considering aquatic animals when we're moving the conversation about law generally forward. And I also apologize that I'm an English speaker. I'll try not to speak too quickly. I have a tendency to do that. You can slow me down if I go too fast. One of the things I start with for my presentations is a land and labor acknowledgement. So in DC, where I am right now, we honor the indigenous people on whose traditional and ancestral homelands we stand. And they include the Anacostans, the Pamunkey, the Nantico, Upper Mattaponi, Rappahannock, Chickahominy, Monacan, Powhatan, and many other indigenous nations of this region. We also acknowledge that much of what we know of this area today was made possible from the forced labor of enslaved individuals and communities. In remembering these communities, we honor their legacy, their lives, and their descendants. And in particular, when we're talking about animal and environmental issues, it's important to think about learning from the respectful relationships that indigenous communities have had historically and still have in the present day. So as an overview, I said, I'm just going to be talking a little bit about the beginning of aquatic animal law, the role of animals, these animals in the property scheme, and how we can move forward with our thinking about them. So our beginning in 2016, after many years of doing other presentations where I was looking for information about aquatic animals. So when I was talking about farmed animals or animals used in research or companion animals or animals in entertainment, I kept having to try to find information about the aquatic animals in those settings, and there wasn't much data. There just wasn't a lot of information. People weren't writing about it. And so after a while, I realized someone has to start to do that. So I created the Aquatic Animal Law Initiative at Lewis and Clark under the animal law clinic that I was teaching. And then I was lucky enough to be able to hire Amy Wilson to be my aquatic animal law fellow. And she came up with the brilliant idea of World Aquatic Animal Day, because we said, what do we want to do to sort of make a mark and spread this conversation about aquatic animals more broadly? And so she said, let's have World Aquatic Animal Day. And so we, as Marita said, we've been having it for 4 years, and next year will be our 5th. And we're also working on a book called Aquatic Animals, Law, Science, and Policy with 2 other co-authors. And so we're hoping to gather the quickly evolving area of aquatic animal law and share it with folks so it's easier for them to work and study and write in the area. So, and what I've done now is take what was originally the Aquatic Animal Law Initiative at Lewis and Clark, and now that I'm at GW, it's the Aquatic Animal Law Project. Because Lewis and Clark has not continued that work. So I've brought it with me to Washington and hope to enlarge what we've already worked on. Okay, so thinking as a framework, starting with the idea that all animals, generally speaking, right, are considered property in legal regimes around the world, and aquatic animals in particular. So looking at them in particular, they have some of the same issues that other animals have and some additional ones. So the same issues are that they're all deemed owned or managed, right, by private individuals, corporations, or governments, even though that ownership status is being contested by researchers now, which is good. That ownership does not always require responsible care. We know that. Animals are not seen as self-owning, which is problematic in the law, and we can compare that to the problems that children and other human beings have had when they're not seen as self-owning. And we can look to those disfavored human populations for potential solutions to this problem and ways forward. And animals are generally seen as plentiful resources. So one, as a resource, which is problematic, and two, plentiful. For some people, their only purpose is to be used by humans, whether that's enjoyment or some kinds of extractive use. And that's how animals are that's the groundwork, right, for our legal decision-making and much of our social decision-making. Because animals aren't seen as valuable for themselves, we have some problems that problematic outcomes in the law. So the law doesn't know how to attribute value to animals without this human benefit, right? Without saying, well, we need them for the environment. So if they're endangered and we want to have more of them around, we'll protect them. But how do we protect each and every one of them as individuals and as species? Apart from human benefit, the law just doesn't really have a framework in most places in the globe, right? To figure out how to do that, which is not surprising because the law also doesn't really know how to value human lives, right? It's a challenge when a human being is injured or is killed. Like, what is that value? The law is a really rough measure for trying to address that problem, right? We can't bring the human back or the animal back. So what we're doing is replacing that loss with some kind of economic metric usually. And that calculus is really challenging. And likewise, the law doesn't know how to value the natural world itself. It doesn't even know how to conceive of the natural world. And so try to figure out how to value it. And we know that in legal regimes, when there isn't value, there isn't protection, right? So if we don't know how to value the animals, then we don't care about protecting them. And so that's something that we need to address, because when we don't value them and we don't protect them, we have abuse, neglect, cruelty, and extinction. And those are problems that we need to address. Okay, so that's the problem with not really seeing the animals. So if we want to see them and we want to understand them, we need to recognize the challenges are greater for aquatic animals than they are for terrestrial animals, right? Because people just literally don't see them. They don't know who they are. They don't know what they're like. And so trying to even remind people which animals we're talking about in the work that we do, sometimes people just automatically think about fishes, or they might think about whales or dolphins or turtles, but they don't think about all of the aquatic animals. And so this is just a list of some of the categories. And at the bottom on the left side are categories that people often either don't know or forget. So people think corals, for instance, aren't animals. They think that, they're sort of rocks. They don't know that sponges are animals. They forget about the aquatic aquatic insects. So trying to help people really see these animals are out there, then we can begin to think about what's appropriate and how we respond to them and how the law should engage with them. And so the numbers really vary between all the sources that I read. So some have said there's likely more than 2 million marine species, and those are marine species, not even the freshwater species. But I just read something this week that over 5,000 new species have been recently discovered in the Pacific deep sea. And that's just one patch in the Pacific. So we really don't know how many of these animals are out there. We don't know who they are, what their capacities or needs are. So that's something that we need to do, right? We need to see them, we need to understand them, and then we can talk about them. So this invisibility is a problem when we don't see them. We have this lack of interaction, which leads to a lack of understanding and a lack of empathy. We also still tend to think of them as so plentiful that their numbers are uncountable, and that means they're an unlimited resource. And it also means we discount the value of individual animals, right? And we tend to just talk about their value in terms of species. So we need legal protection and regulation for use and abuse of these animals, and try to shift that so that animals are seen as valuable. And we also need to talk a lot more about alternatives. So those 5,000 animals were discovered in what's going to be a deep sea mining area, right? For the US, China, and probably Japan. That's why they were in there. That's why they discovered these animals. And so we need to start thinking about alternatives to uses, right? If we can stop the deep sea mining, for instance, before it gets really underway, the environment will save a lot of animals. So thinking about those alternatives is important. So in understanding the animals, science is really become much more helpful in the last 20 years than it was prior to that. Sentience right now is one of the main conversations that people are comfortable having, thinking about when they're thinking about how to value an animal. One of the questions people ask is this animal sentient, right? So the 4 animals on this slide have all passed the mirror self-recognition test, which means they understand who they are and that they're different than another animal in the mirror, that they are the animal in the mirror, not that that's another individual. And so they have pain, they have cognition, they have self-awareness, and they have other capacities. And that's not to say that other animals don't have that. It's just that these animals have passed that test. I want to note sort of at the top when we talk about sentience, even though it's an easy marker for the law, not easy, but it's a starting place for the law to think about whether animals should have value and be protected. It's still a very human-centric framework, right? So we're saying, are they enough like us to deserve protection, rather than who are they and do they need protection to be who they are? So I just want to note that. But the reason the science is important is because not only does it inform us and our work, it informs the law. And so the law is beginning to say, okay, if these animals can suffer, then we may have some duties to prevent unnecessary suffering. And that's this connection between the law and the science that's really important. And we see the impact of this new scientific information in the legal space around the world. So we know about the UK sentience bill, and I'm going to continue to kind of speak quickly. I'm happy to take questions after if there are things I'm saying that aren't familiar to you all. But the UK has a sentience bill that protects animals, and it didn't start to include, at the start, it did not include aquatic animals, but the science was significant enough that it included not just fishes, but decapod crustaceans and cephalopod mollusks. In Spain, we already know that some animal sentience is recognized in the criminal code, and now it's been added to the civil code with respect to companion animals. Germany recognizes sentience and suffering and some elements of its legal frameworks. So I could go on there. These legal innovations are important to see where sentience has become a part of the conversation and the law in a way of a framework through which we can talk about protecting animals. We're also beginning to study ocean aquaculture settings more and the welfare both of those animals and wild-caught fishes. And we're beginning to have scientific information about larger cognitive capacities and psychological capacities of these animals. So the cleaner wrasse fish are the fish that eat the lice off of the salmon. And so the aquaculture industry wants to, breed them and put them in aquaculture settings to eat the lice so that the salmon that they want to then sell to consumers, they'll have more of those salmon. So there's been a study about the psychological preferences for those fish, how to figure out which fish are more likely to eat which kind of lice, which indicates that the scientists understand that these fish not only have sort of innate capacities and maybe instinctive behavior, but they have psychological preferences, which is kind of amazing. In the news very recently, right, there's been speculation about the psychological motivation for the orcas that have been harassing or harming, right, the boats in south of Spain and Portugal, right, in that waterway. And also about the Russian so-called spy whale, right, that was around Norway and has now moved into Swedish waters. So thinking about the psychological motivations for these animals is a good thing, right, that people are beginning to recognize that they can have emotions, they can have desires and psychological motivations. So what does that mean, right? So if we take all of that and port that into legal protections, what does that look like? So my suggestion is that we should be creating a duty, a broad duty to avoid unnecessary harm and suffering. And so we need to answer the questions, what is necessary and what is harm and what is suffering, and broadly define those. We should create a duty to use alternatives and to create alternatives when they're not available. We should shift our defaults so that we're using the precautionary principle. So if we think harm is going to be a result of our actions, we should shift to not doing that until we can try and find another way around that. We should assume sentience until we're proving that animals aren't sentient, right? So at this point, we sorry. There we go, sorry. We are making scientists prove animal by animal that they're sentient in order to come into this framework of consideration. And I think we should shift that. So just assume that they're all sentient unless science suggests otherwise. And so let's look really quickly at some of the uses. I'm going to talk really broadly because I assume you have some familiarity with this. When we talk about aquatic animals and their uses, this is the image sometimes that people have in their mind. This is what fishing looks like, right? It's sort of bucolic. We've done it for thousands and thousands of years, but this is what industrial fishing looks like right now in the open oceans. And this is what aquaculture looks like. Some of it not even outside, right? Indoors. So we're making in a factory setting the development of these animals for food, not just for humans, but for industrial and other purposes. So, and the numbers that we're talking about in these settings is really enormous. So worldwide, 178 million tons of animals, and this is the only area for animal law folks where we talk about tons of animals because that's how we get the data. We're not talking about individuals. In the US, we can tell you how many cows are killed every year, how many chickens, how many pigs, but we can't tell you how many fishes or how many oysters or lobsters. We're talking about tons of animals, which further devalues them, right? And so that's both aquaculture and the wild caught fishing. And this sector is increasing significantly around the globe in pretty much every country. So there's also things like algae, right, that people need to be thinking about that we're also taking from the water environments. There are other uses of animals that aren't even counted in that 178 ton number. So farming for skin and teeth, breeding for research or entertainment or work, hatcheries, sunbait fish, those animals aren't counted in these numbers. Those numbers do include 20 million tons of animals being turned into fish meal, fish oil, bait, pet food, animal food, or drugs. And this sector is a very, very lucrative sector right now, over 500 billion annually, with a third of that, over a third of that lost and wasted. So all of these animals who are being killed, right, a third of them lost and wasted, right? So wrong animals, bycatch, this doesn't count bycatch. Or poor management, right? And that also doesn't count the illegal, unreported, or unregulated fishing. So even if people don't care about the animals themselves, right, we're destroying our fisheries and the habitats of the ocean. So we're looking at 100% maximally fished oceans by 2027, which is a pretty scary number. So some other uses that I'll just run through really, really quickly, because again, people don't think about how we use animals. So it was earlier mentioned before we started about zebrafish. So we're raising millions of zebrafish all over the globe to be used in research as a replacement, right, for some other animal models. But we farm alligators and crocodiles. We harvest 700 tons of pearls annually across the globe, and you know how much a pearl weighs. So imagine how many oysters, right, you need to have killed in order to get 700 tons of pearls. Sea cucumbers, 43,000 tons globally. Japanese sea cucumbers, 201,000 tons. Goldfish in the US annually, right, 200 to 250 million goldfish being raised for, you know, people to be putting them in bowls in their homes. With the shark trade, 73 million globally, with another 273 million fishing deaths, 1.9 billion in US dollars, exports of sponges and corals. We use dolphins in the Navy, as I mentioned, the one whale that may have escaped Russia's use of their military. Octopus, people are trying now to farm octopus. I'll say more about that in a minute. Sharks raise aquarium fish, right? So we're talking about and this doesn't cover all of the uses, right, that are happening with aquatic animals around the globe, but just gives you a sense of the really significant numbers and the really diverse kinds of uses. So ways forward. So we need to stop seeing animals in the natural world primarily as resources for human use. We need to remember that even though they're maybe the worst, that fishing and aquaculture are not the only exploitive and extractive uses of the natural and built environments. We need to consider sustainability and harm of other uses and other degradations as well, to consider the needs of the animals for themselves, for their own sake, and for the species. And when we don't do that, it hurts the environment, it impoverishes the development of the law, it hinders creation of appropriate mechanisms to restrain the cruelty and abuse that humans inflict on animals. And it constrains our understanding, our conceptualization and implementation of animal protection measures, and seeing how those animals fit into the environment. And it deprioritizes the enforcement of laws that we actually do have to protect animals. And doing better, trying to change all of this, is going to take a lot of effort. So it helps to begin by saying that animals are not our property, they're not our products, and they aren't ours. So we need to include their interest in our decision making, accept the science around their capacities, accept the legal obligation to do no unnecessary harm or create suffering to those capacities, to reframe our relationships with animals, right, within the law and other disciplines, to accept that humans are animals, we're a part of this, animal world, not above it, and to look for ways to coexist in a mutually supportive way. So there are a number of laws and legal frameworks to help us move in those directions, right? So there's, right now, animals are a property. Some people suggest we change that to a property plus or living property. Some focus on animal rights as a framework, or rights of nature, or specifically Pachamama, or an ethical approach into the law, things like ecofeminism or deep ecology, or a tribal rights or indigenous perspective. So there are a lot of different frameworks, and so we're in a really wonderful time to be thinking about different pathways to move forward with respect to our understanding of these animals. So I've got a few things that I could talk about of laws that are changing really quickly. So I'll just mention them, but I think out of time. So I'll just mention them and we can talk about them in the question. So octopus farming is a big issue right now in the US and certainly in the Canary Islands. The new legal ramifications of not protecting the vaquita, the need to protect the corals, the UN Treaty on Marine Biodiversity is, I think, an important bill to be aware of, if not talk about. And I'll mention one happy thing, which is this is Tokitai, also called Lolita, who's been a captive whale in the aquarium in Miami. And there's an agreement for the first time ever for a private entertainment sea park to release an animal like this back into the wild. And so that conversation is ongoing. So with that, I'll stop and thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's really fascinating presentation and highly interesting. So, Amy, you have a question. Yes. Okay. Thank you, Kathy. So we now invite Amy to take the word and to start her presentation. I would like to stress that Amy Wilson is the founder and the director of the Animals, a project, a very important project, Animal Law Reform South Africa. I think it's the only project or and the first one who has started the interest for animals in your country. It is not? So I think that this is very important. So to stress that in a young researcher, as Amy is, has started this initiative that demonstrate her passion for animals, and so a character and temperament that don't watch so troubles or obstacles, but opportunities for animals. Thank you, Amy, for your work, and so welcome to the clinic. Please, when you like, you can start.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that introduction, Marita, and thank you for inviting me and for having me. I'm very excited to be with you all today, even though it's virtual. I'm going to be talking today about aquatic rights, the intersecting interests of animals, humans, and nature. So I have got quite a task on me. Great. So I just want to start with a couple of starting points because I think it's important to frame the discussion with the fundamental status that aquatic animals and all animals are individuals with intrinsic worth. As Prof. Hessler mentioned, some of them have been proven to be sentient, others we should assume they are sentient unless proven otherwise. They also have various other capacities that we deem worthy of protection, whether those are capacities that humans have or other animals have and are otherwise legally protected. So I believe that they should be protected in their own right. And that framing is important because a lot of what I'm going to be discussing today doesn't necessarily focus just on protecting animals, but it also focuses on protecting human and anthropocentric interests, as well as environmental or environmental centric interests. So that framing I want to get out the way from the start. However, the law currently does not offer adequate protection to aquatic animals. So sometimes they are excluded from the definition of animal in pieces of legislation. That includes the Animal Welfare Act in the US. It includes the South African Animal Protection Act, and there's various other examples across the globe. Sometimes they are not included in cruelty legislation at all, and sometimes they themselves or practices that are done to them are exempted. So it's important to see that this framing allows for various harms to be done to them, but it also impacts on us as humans as well as the planet. So how do we get better protection for them? I say we should do this by taking an intersectional and integrational approach. So two of the questions I'm going to deal with today is how does our use of and exploitation of aquatic animals impact on animals themselves, on nature and the environment, as well as on human rights and interests? And then following on from that, what do these intersections mean for those of us who are seeking to challenge the exploitation and use and to get better protections for them in our regulatory systems? So on the slide, you can see these are a couple of examples of the intersections. I'm not going to go through all of them, but starting to think about these issues more holistically allows us different legal avenues to target better protection. And some of these I am going to delve into, but hopefully it will give you a more holistic understanding in your own respective jurisdictions and work that you can bring in, perhaps if you are writing about researching or working on these issues or laws. I do also think it's important to contextualize the fact that aquatic animals, even among advocates themselves, are often forgotten, as Prof. Hessler mentioned, but in the context of our laws and policies, they are seen as a solution to various problems, including food insecurity, as well as unemployment, and they are used to promote economic and various other incentives and political incentives. As an alternative to other animal use, because we have been very successful in some ways against raising the platform of other animals and the harms caused by, for example, testing on animals such as primates or using terrestrial animals in agriculture, we've seen an increase of industries such as aquaculture and wild-caught fishing. So aquatic animals are seen to be, in some instances, these are not my personal opinions, but they are seen to be better than using certain terrestrial animals. In some ways, they require less input protein. They require less resources, whether it be land or water. They produce lower greenhouse gas emissions, and they are punted as a healthy protein choice. You'll have seen headlines saying, eat more fish, it's healthy for you. Some of them even remove carbon from the atmosphere, such as oysters. And as I mentioned already, there's generally less regulation, which opens them up to bigger harms. They are punted again as sustainable. You'll see it on the marketing of fish products in the grocery stores. And accordingly, people can sometimes feel a bit more better about it ethically because it's less morally wrong to, say, eat a fish than, a dog. So those are some of the complexities at a very high level, and those are challenges that we must be aware of when we're advocating for aquatic animals as well. These are just a couple of headlines I pulled just very recently to illustrate the fact I'm going to be talking a lot about aquaculture because it's impossible to deal with all of the different uses that Prof. Hessler mentioned. So I am going to be focusing a lot on aquatic animals as food, specifically aquaculture. But it is the fastest growing food system in the entire world. And there's huge amounts of investments that's going into this. It's hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions if you consider the global market, whether it's the feed, whether it's the equipment, and it's across the globe. It's from Angola all the way to, you know, Spain. So every country is pursuing this, and it's very important that it's on your radar. So with that, I'm going to delve into our stakeholder discussions. As I mentioned, I have 3 identified stakeholders: animals, nature, and people. So the first stakeholder is animal rights and interests. If we look at aquaculture, the farming of aquatic species, particularly animals in this instance, we of course consider the animals who themselves are farmed, whether that is fishes, crustaceans, cephalopods, as we've seen, oysters. But there are various other animals who are implicated in the broader chain. For example, often insects are farmed and those insects are fed to aquatic species. Now we're talking huge numbers of animals because, as we know, insects are very small. Sometimes aquatic animals are either farmed and fed to other aquatic species, or they are caught from the ocean, as Prof. Hessler mentioned, and they are fed to other aquatic animals, so they are indirectly used in the industry. We have cleaner fish who are used to clean parasites such as sea lice off of species in aquacultural facilities. We have the animals to whom aquatic animals are fed. These are sometimes other terrestrial farmed animals. And then we have wild animals who are implicated in this as well, whether it's by aquaculture facilities impacting their migratory routes, whether it's the pollution, whether it's escapement of animals, the broader environment is affected by this. And I'll give a couple of examples. So you start to understand that it's not just the singular animals who are used, who are themselves important, but there's various chains that need to be considered holistically. There are various issues that arise, welfare issues for the animals who are used in aquaculture. Some of these are similar to those in terrestrial circumstances, although they are unique due to the practice of it being in water. So I won't do all of these, but we can discuss it in the questions. But as we know, there are prevalence of diseases. Their welfare isn't taken into account when they are transported, reared, and slaughtered, and there's mutilations, etc. Okay, that's just one visual representation. Sorry, I didn't give a trigger warning for those who might be, I have a few slides that might be triggering, but this is a deformity of a trout. So similar to terrestrial animals, there are deformities because of the way these animals are bred intensively. And as I mentioned, these are a couple of the slaughter issues, slaughter welfare methods that are used. And there are also wild caught methods that are used, which caused a tremendous amount of suffering. And here I will note that very often, aquatic animals are not included in humane slaughter laws. So in the US, there's a Humane Methods of Livestock Slaughter Act. Aquatic animals are not included in there. Our Meat Safety Act in South Africa, aquatic animals are not included in there, which requires stunning before they are killed. So these animals are killed in very horrible ways, right? And they suffer tremendously. So that just gives you an idea of the welfare. It also potentially shows you some advocacy efforts where you can try and expand existing legislation to apply to aquatic species, given that we know that they suffer in the same ways as terrestrial animals. It implicates human health, the way that these animals are farmed. I won't go through all of them. As I mentioned, some of these you'll be aware of from the terrestrial animal farming context, but some are unique, such as the prevalence of mercury, as well as microplastics because of the aquatic environments in which they exist, and also people who suffer from allergies, etc. Disease is well acknowledged by the aquaculture industry. This is a survey from 2017 of the shrimp industry, which showed diseases as the #1 issue and challenge. Because of the high prevalence of diseases, there's a high prevalence of antibiotic use, which, as we know, leads to antibiotic and antimicrobial resistance, which the World Health Organization has said is one of the greatest threats to our health of our time. So very important to recognize diseases are very prevalent. Fishes and aquatic species are not the health food necessarily that they are punted to be. This is an example of an animal suffering from a disease who was used in aquaculture. Just to illustrate some of the antibiotics and drugs that are used, this is a slide of the approved antibiotics for the US. I'm not sure it differs country to country, but as you can see, you can hardly even read, never mind pronounce those words, and all of those have an impact on human health and well-being as well. So I encourage you to consider all these different aspects in your respective countries, and if aquaculture is something you are interested in working on, that you can potentially use health-related legislation or laws that regulate the use of antibiotics as well, and explore those avenues. The second stakeholder, as I mentioned, is environment or nature. And again, I'm going to focus on food without going into too much detail to give you some broader context of the fact that aquaculture has severe implications for the environment, everything from various types of pollution, and not just from, for example, waste, but from pesticides, antibiotics, pharmaceuticals, and even strange things like keeping algae off the nets and the chemicals that they use. The amount of wild caught species who are caught to feed these animals, contaminations, escapements is a major one for the impact for the surrounding ecosystems. And then it does, of course, implicate other threatened and vulnerable protected species. However, that does give us opportunities to utilize laws that protect those animals. It affects migratory species. There's massive climate impacts on that. It's not the greenhouse gas emission winner that it's punted to be. And it is largely unsustainable despite the claims of the industry. So again, that's just to give you a very broad picture of the environmental harms. And this is a graphic representation of a fish farm showing some of these environmental harms, particularly the pollution. And you'll see there's also surrounding homes here who are no doubt implicated by these farms as well. And then finally, just to touch on some of the human rights and interests. And again, I'm going to focus largely on fish's food, but I will use some wild caught examples too. So wild caught fishing has been linked to human slavery, even in today's day and age. There's illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. Lots of things that happen on the high seas go without any sort of regulation, oversight, nor enforcement. There's piracy, there's organized criminal activities. Commercialized fishing operations take away from small-scale livelihoods, people who have lived around these communities and waters for years. There's massive workers' rights and safeties. I'll discuss some in the context of aquaculture on the next slide. Undocumented workers, brutal treatment of workers, etc. In fact, fishing has been declared as one of the most dangerous of all professions by the International Labour Organization. So you start to see again how the workers as well as the animals are abused in these various industries. And following on from that, I pulled a couple of examples, just high level, for workers in the aquaculture industry. There's now increasing number of studies that showing that aquaculture is nearly, if not just as dangerous as fishing, with some of its own unique considerations, whether these are from the equipment, various types of injuries suffered by the workers, the fact that they can get infected with bacterial and parasitic infections and pathogens, exposure to harmful chemicals. There's often exemptions from occupational health and safety legislation for them, as well as for the workers who get special visas. So these are largely like immigrant workers who are already vulnerable groups. Of course, it differs from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but you start to see each one of these different compounding factors that can implicate the workers' rights and, of course, make them just as vulnerable in some instances as the animals that they are unfortunately killing. Other human rights issues that arise come in the form of consumer protection, where these claims, as I already said, are being made by industry on products and in marketing, that they are sustainable, where they are coming from, the sourcing. And we have seen a rise of recent case law, including in the US, where there's class action lawsuits against these companies because of these claims, which they say are misleading. So it's a growing area of law that's quite interesting. And then there's a prevalence of seafood fraud, which takes many different forms, but of course has huge implications, not only for the people who are consuming the products, believing that it's something else, but as I mentioned, people who suffer from allergies, vulnerable groups, health, etc. So this is to contextualize this. And then, of course, I'd be remiss not to mention the First Nations and Indigenous groups who are also implicated by these. So as you can see, various human rights, and this is by no means even an exhaustive list of the considerations. because of these different areas that are impacted, we can, of course, use different areas of law, which is positive. We can use animal law to try and get better protections. We can use environmental law, we can use human rights protections. However, increasingly we can and we should also pursue rights-based frameworks. So Kathy mentioned them briefly, but I'll just highlight 3 examples. The first is that, as far as I can tell, one of the only rights, direct rights for animals has been included for aquatic species is a resolution by the city of San Francisco, specifically relating to whales and dolphins, allowing them the right to be free from captivity and remain unrestricted. So that's a positive direct right for aquatic animals in law. And the use of rights of nature to apply to animals. We've seen the Ecuadorian case of Estrelita, although that was, of course, a monkey, a terrestrial animal. We have seen how that impacted Panama and their decision to include in their rights of nature law turtles. So turtles now are one of the only species in the whole planet who has direct legal rights thanks to this brand new law, which is extremely exciting. And I think we might see a trend for rights of nature, for animal rights being certain aquatic species. And then there's a nice case that's coming out of the US where rights of nature is being used for salmon. So just to close with a final example of where I think human rights and aquatic animals can work together, I want to pull on a case that happened in South Africa last year. This didn't relate to food, this related to seismic surveying, so energy, by mega corporation Shell, where they were trying to conduct these activities, and there was massive pushback by the communities because it implicated their fishing rights, their cultural belief to the ocean and their ancestors being part of the ocean, their constitutional rights to be consulted. It infringed on environmental law. There wasn't proper licensing consideration in the environmental impact assessment, customary law, administrative law, and animal law. Of course, the animals who were going to be affected by this, not only whales, but various other animals. And then, of course, the science. So it was a beautiful example of this marriage of all of these different areas of law where all of these communities and groups came together, and the court considered all these interests holistically as against the rights of Shell to exploit. And the court found in favor of the communities, which we are very excited about in South Africa. We hope it sets a very good precedent. And those are just examples of the statements from some of the communities where they said it's a victory against capitalist extraction. So that's an exciting case. And in closing, I'll say I hope to see more of these. And I think in our efforts to extend protection for aquatic animals, we need to build on the intersections of humans, animals, and the environment. And we can hope to achieve a better future for all. So my intersections, I'll stop there. Thanks for your time.
Yes. So thank you. So Amy, for this terrific and highly interesting presentation. So how you have stressed so subjects of thinking really very important. So the idea of so compare intersections between animal rights and so protection of animals is, I think, a very important point. So to start to talk. Okay, then we have to welcome Megan Natali now and other colleagues from Mexico, Elizabeth Montero and Diane Morales, former students from the master also, and other colleagues that I have not met before. So please, I have many questions. I have also doubts and suggestions, but I give the word to our assistants. So to start to ask and to interrogate our guests for today. So who would like to start? Yes. So I have questions. For example, Kathy, in your presentation, you talked about the animals, this very so to me have impacted these two statements. Animals are designed to be used, no value, no protection. That is really dramatic, because that is true. It is not only because it's really so well constructed, but it is really true. About fishes, about aquatic animals, I would like to ask you if you don't think that aquatic animals have not really a property law. They are not under a property law. So could you please explain better from the common law point of view this this issue, that this is really important in my opinion? Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So from the common law perspective, they're still considered property. They may or may not be considered owned. And so that affects who can interact with them and what they can do with them. And so if we find them within governmental jurisdiction, then they're either owned by or managed by, right, the governmental entity that has jurisdiction over those territorial waters. In the open oceans where nobody owns them, they're still considered property that can be reduced to ownership if they're taken. And the interesting thing there, that you would think in some ways they have more protection because they're not automatically owned, but they have less protection because they can be owned by anybody. Anyone can go and take them out of the ocean and then they own them, right? And they can kill them or they can put them in an aquarium or whatever they want to do. So thinking it's the right question to be asking, because as long as they're property, people can own them. And in the open waters, there's so much that can be done that we need regulation to manage, to reduce and regulate, right? That reduction of the animal to an ownership status.
Yes. So in fact, it is so we have not created. Also in civil law, we have the difficulty that aquatic animals are the ownership of all. So there are res nullius, so to say in Latin. So are things. And this is the harmonization of things that have not ownership for nobody. So to the reality that they have been protected, this is the one of the points of trouble and of the incomprehensions and the incapacity of legislators so to better protect aquatic animals. This is projected in everything, in other aspects. This is a key point. You have really and for example, the concept of unnecessary pain. How to apply that? This is here we have a veterinary as CITO. So how to apply unnecessary pain so to aquatic animals. So this is inviting you so also to a reflection about this point. Yes.
Well, Marita, I think it's a difficult point to focus. Difficult or not difficult, because for us, for example, pain is clear, at least from a veterinarian point of view. So maybe for people that is not used to work with fish, so maybe, for example, comparing with let's say dogs or cats, that you can assess pain very easily because of grimaces or they are closer animals. But how can you assess pain, for example, in fish? For example, the only way to assess pain is because fishes in general escapes or moves, but this is also general movement, so you can assess exactly that. But if you go to neuropathology, it is crystal clear that the same let's say neuronal activity that is associated to pain in terrestrial vertebrates exist in fish. This is absolutely recognized. So maybe the problem is that how we, the humans, we can detect this pain or distress in fish. So basically, there are, as veterinarians, there are indicators. For example, we have markers in water, and so especially in aquaculture, we can measure cortisol levels in water levels. And so I think this is moving, and there's this possibility, but we cannot apply the same template as for terrestrials, because it's a completely different thing. And for example, as veterinarians, we are very few veterinarians that are specialized in aquatic animals, so there's a lack of specialists. So as you know, Marita, for example, in my case, I always say that I think the best approach on that is, at the end is based on two words: is responsibility and sustainability. So I think if you are performing in this way, and you have in mind that if you are involved in any kind of, let's say, context of management with aquatic animals, both words, responsibility and sustainability, should be the right way to address. Even I think that I am not an expert in legislations, but because legislations is, so, at least from my point of view, came more from moral and ethics, and this is a more, let's say, anthropocentric view. I prefer to go to another, is more ecocentric approach. And in this way, if you are looking on responsibility and sustainability, I think you can approach better what the legislation should be, let's say, built in some way. No, I don't know if I am using the right words, because I am not I am not in legislation, but from my point of view as a fish veterinarian, this is my recommendation to approach this question.
Okay, thank you, Cito. So Bo has a question. So thank you, Bo. So you have, yes, now.
Yeah.
Hi, Bo.
Hi. Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Amy. Thank you for your excellent presentations. And I have a question here. That is, according to my own experience, the European people and the American people, they usually eat more fish from the seawater than the fish from the fresh water. So I'm wondering, is there any difference in the protection of the freshwater fish and the seawater fish, for example, according to people's attitudes towards the fishes? Thank you.
Okay.
I can say really quickly, and Amy may have a different perspective from the South African experience, but because the US is so large, the people in the middle part of the country eat a lot of freshwater fish from lakes and streams, and the people on the coast eat more of the seawater fish, although there's certainly a lot of trade. And so there are a lot of seawater fishes across the country. The people in the US don't tend to worry about the protections of these animals or where they come from. Some of them are coming from across the globe. Some of them are coming from very close by. So when the animals are coming more locally, that's when people are a little more aware of the need for protecting the animals and protecting the environment. So they want there to be enough of the animals so they can go and fish for, pleasure. They want there to be a healthy water system. So there are, and the legal system allows for more local control than it does federal or national control. So it's easier for a community to regulate freshwater fishes and their habitats than it is the oceans, and certainly even beyond our territorial boundaries. So that's, I think, a little bit of an answer. Is that helpful in understanding sort of, okay, and then Amy may want to add, because South Africa has so much water that it's involved with.
Yes.
Yeah, I would just say generally that marine species would receive a bit more protection because we have such a very long coastline, and it's very significant for economic perspectives. So I would say generally the marine is much more regulated than the freshwater, and there's a lot more enforcement, even though it's still problematic on the marine side than the freshwater side.
And I'll add also very quickly, I think some of the marine species are seen as more valuable. They're friendlier, right? Whales and dolphins and turtles, you know, penguins, those animals are ones that humans tend to have a deeper connection with because they have eyes and they seem to smile and they're, you know, they're cute, right? In some ways, or we have made them into, we're thinking that they're cute. Whereas some of the, you know, the trout or those animals in the freshwater, they don't have that kind of good public relations, if you will. And so animals without that kind of, you know, that cultural appreciation aren't as protected as much.
Yeah, thank you both. So I don't know if there are more questions from the public who is in the session. Maybe Megan. So Cito, yes, please.
I fully agree with Kathy that is a very important point on that is, for example, the difference between, for example, let's say marine mammals or turtles. I think important is the human perception, and maybe I am not joking, is I have a theory on that, is if the animal has been seen in a Disney film, the perception is completely different. So there is a big change, especially in fish, and I'm not joking, before and after Nemo, for example. So the perception that the fish is a sentient animal has changed a lot with Nemo, even with if Doris has only 4 seconds memory. But I think it's a big change. The same happened in Spain, Marita, you know, with bullfighting, with Ferdinand, for example. They made a big change, especially in the young people, after Ferdinand, Disney's Ferdinand was produced, that was launched at the cinemas. So I think it's an important point to take into account.
Yeah, can I just speak to that? Because I think I absolutely agree with what you're saying, that people, if there's a Disney movie, I think that the opposite is also true, because there's been studies that show that after Nemo, there was a greater extraction of those animals because more people wanted them as pets. So there was a dramatic decrease in the wild population because everybody wanted to have a Nemo as a pet. And even with a movie like 101 Dalmatians, after that movie, everyone wanted Dalmatians. So there was a massive increase in the breeding. So I agree that it's excellent for people to empathize with those types of animals, but it can also lead to more problematic things for those animals in terms of keeping them afterwards as well.
Yes, so and also so what I would like to ask you, Amy, so you have referred to the very interesting parallelism between human rights and fish protection. This is an original point of view, I think, because the increasingly interest of human rights has not founded the same parallelism in protecting, for example, aquatic animals. So we have projected our interest in protecting biodiversity as a concept, but this has to do what Cito has also talked about. This is the ignorance. So we are very foreign, very framed from aquatic animals. We don't understand the lives. For example, a film that has waked up the interest of many people about the octopus, for example, was the Oscarized film about what octopus teached me or something, something like that. So many more films about in this way. So if we can, if we can also share our interest in creators, in filmmakers, and so and type of industry, maybe people can understand better what with fishes, with aquatic animals is going about. So I was thinking about also, so there are less case law about fishing or about fishes, about aquatic animals than other animals. The lack of case law in this field is enormous. So there are really, so we can select very few cases, and they are singularized. So we can talk about, do you remember this case? That is also strange. So and I think so happened in Spain so 15-20 years ago, that there were so very few case law, for example, about greyhounds. This is the subject of the thesis of law, because the people has never denounced it. So aggressions, so against greyhounds, for example, and this is also the case for aquatic animals. We are not mentalized that, so we can denounce. So we can ask legislators, we can ask judges. So we are the agents of protection. So not only so the invested ones. So this is something that I think, but probably it is not. It is so. There are two more questions. One from Emilia Kudasic Hill. So Emilia from Poland.
Yes. Hello. Thank you, everyone. I would like to refer to this perception of fish as the sorry. Do you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, perfect. As a fish welfare and fish abuse, because and your subject you just referred to as judgments of fish. So in Poland, we have the very specific case which ended recently, but the first judgment was from 2016. It was a judgment of the Supreme Court, because in Poland we have the problem with, especially during Christmas time, of buying fish in supermarkets which are still alive and which people kills on their own in their houses. And this fish, they are like the transport of this fish are mainly in plastic plastic boxes without any water, and they are in supermarkets. They are also stored in boxes, sometimes without water. And before 2016, it was not considered as animal abuse. And in 2016, the Supreme Court of Poland said that this particular conduct of supermarkets and of people who buy those kind of fish has to be considered as animal abuse. And after that judgment, actually the legislator changes the Polish Animal Welfare Act and added the specific clause which refers now to fish specifically, and that you have to because the natural habitat of fish is water, so you have to give fish the water when you want to sell it. Unfortunately, it is still you can still sell live fish in Poland, which is nonsense for me because you have to kill it later. But we are trying to change it as well. But this judgment is very one of the most important of fish, but also as animals, because it started the whole animal welfare and animal law consideration in Poland. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Emilia. So, who would like to answer or to address something, some words to Emilia?
I can say really quickly, it was great to hear about that. And sometimes it goes, just as Amy was saying, in the other direction. When there's a win for the animals, they go back, legislators go back and tighten the legislation to say, oh, we didn't want them to win, and we're going to make sure they're not included. So in the United States right now, fish are included in some states legislation for against animal cruelty, but not in other states. And in some states, it's silent about whether they are or they're not included, which gives people not enough guidance about how to protect them. But I think it's such a strong statement when the courts and the legislature say, no, this is a problem. We need to accept that this is a problem. It's been a problem, but now we know, and we can do better. So I think it's very, very hopeful for the Polish law.
Yes, yes, thank you. So, Laura, you have something to ask to? Yes, please.
Oui. No, I want to thank you, Marita, for the parallel with the subject of my thesis. I think is important to do that, but I think there is a little difference. Is the regulation of hunting dogs hunting with galgos, with Spanish greyhounds, exists, but the difference with marine wildlife is that is a lack of regulation and provisions. Sorry for my English, but for example, in France, we have a complex case because as 2021, a new law aimed at combating animal mistreatment will ban the captivity of marine wildlife in a few words. And no, actually in France, the Marine Land wants to send the orcas, I think is, yes, to Japan to continue to exploiting their animals. Instead, it's possible to putting these orcas in a sanctuary, for example. Yes.
Thank you.
So I saw that was happening, and it's another one of these mixed realities. So the good news is that they're moving away from keeping these animals in captivity for entertainment. So that's good, and that's in furtherance of the goal of the law. That's great. But yes, they should be moved into sanctuary and not into Japan, where they'll be used for display in a country that hasn't outlawed it. So one of the challenges, especially for marine animals, and this comes back to what we were saying before, is we don't have places for them to go. We don't actually have that many sanctuaries, right? And so we're trying to build them. And so it's one thing to say we should move them to sanctuary, but we have to build those sanctuaries so that we can receive the animals. And right now, there isn't much sanctuary space. And so I don't know if that's involved in the decision of that particular case, but something for us to realize. We have to work on all of these things sort of at the same time. I'll be really interested to see, I saw the petition was getting some attention. And so I'll be interested to see if that affects their behavior.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, I know if there is something about somebody. So Megan has written together with Law for the book we are going to publish, that this is in press and has also collaborated Cito. So an article about farm octopuses. This is really a problem, so an initiative that has been carried out in Spain, in North Spain, so in Galicia, but there are other countries, as Amy, you have mentioned, that farmed fishes, but farmed octopuses. So the biggest farm is projected here in Spain. I would like to ask you what you think about taking into account that octopuses are one of the most intelligent and sensitive animals that we know. So we don't know from other animals. So we know about octopuses, but probably so we will be surprised in the future when we discover the capacities of many of these creatures. So, and I was thinking when I was hearing you both about the aquatic animal scopes of the OIE. So this World Organization, and if these could have a role as an initiative for many countries, because so many countries have subscribed this aquatic animal code, but I think the lack of questions, this is something that is a frame for protecting animals, but this is not exhaustive. And probably from the year it has been published to now, so should be, I think, so updated. So Cito, you have posted something more? Oh yes.
Yes, is the paper produced by Elena Lara in Compassion from Animals. It's a very interesting document. Probably most of you already know on the vision about the problem about farming octopuses. That is a real hot spot now in Spain, because Spain is the only country that is producing at the industrial level octopus. So I think it's a very nice approach, and because Elena is also a great communicator.
Thank you for sharing it.
I think it's really helpful, that frame, and we've been lucky in the US. So there was a farm in Hawaii that was farming octopus, and it's shut down right now, not because of animal cruelty, but because it didn't have the proper permits. So it was saying, on the one hand, it was farming octopus that was going to be farming for food, and on the other hand, it was really an entertainment facility. It was letting people, touch the octopus and so forth, but it didn't have the proper permits for either, and so it shut down temporarily. So that's good news, and it raised a lot of attention, and then it helped people in the US become more familiar with the facility in the Canary Islands, so people are more aware. There was also legislation in the state of Washington to prohibit octopus farming. And so it made it partway through the legislative session, but there wasn't enough time to get it to a full vote. So we're hoping it will be introduced again next legislative session, and that other states will be also adding that legislation, which would be really, really good, because if we can get it outlawed before it starts. That's good. And that's sort of an answer to your point, I think, Marita, about the OIE, because one of the nice things about the framework is it's broader, it's helpful, it goes further than a lot of US laws. The downside is there's no enforcement mechanism. And so trying to figure out how to get those concepts into law that is enforceable, right, is, I think, our ongoing challenge. And so if we can kind of come from that top down and then the bottom up and say stopping things, and I think that's an approach that sometimes works.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I don't know if there are other questions, some more interest. So from my side, I would say that I would like to say that I have been really impressed. So to share with you and with the rest of our public, so your thoughts and your insightful impressions about aquatic animals. This is other points of view, so we have to share more. So Emilia, you have something more to add.
Yeah, about the octopus farms, I would say that in European Union nowadays it contradicts the farm to fork strategy, because like in European Union we should strive to improve the situation of farm animals, and new octopus farms are completely contradictory to that. So if you also if you saw the if you have seen the environmental impact assessment about this octopus farms, it will definitely generate antibiotic resistance because these octopuses are taking antibiotics in these farms, and also it can have detrimental effects on local aquatic animals because those farms are in the ocean, as I assume. So you know, I would say that nowadays, after farm to fork strategy in European Union, it should be banned.
Okay, thank you. So like anybody, so thank you, Emilia. Thank you for your observations. So there is more to say, something more to add. So Amy, from your side, maybe. So I would like to give support to your initiatives. So what you are doing, and you are organized in the United States, this is something that we also we have to give support from European side. Absolutely. So probably we have not a collective movement, so an initiative like yours, and so to give more exposition, more light to what you are doing was part of our mission. This is my husband, this is already coming. Okay, then thank you once more. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for your time and your generosity to share with us. So we are a small community, but a community decided to put in, to give light, to give the opportunity young researchers, young people, so how to go ahead. So in this field of animal law, I always think that research is a professional activity, and this is also a way of life. It's a professional activity because allows us to live and support ourselves, but it is also a way of life. This is a way of life because it allows us to explore differences and to confront our opinions and our results with other colleagues. It is like a life that in a continuous learning. So we are always permanent students. That is something that is an advantage because it makes us younger as we in fact are. And because it's an spirit, it is a form of living that we are always questioning ourselves. That is true, that can I do better? Can I explain that in other form? And this is also why in a globalized world, research is a profoundly, I think, democratic activity, because it is designed to deepen knowledge of a field, of a human activity. Sometimes it's something that is ignored by many, like aquatic animals, and to make it known without frontiers. I know that it sounds ambitious that in a small audience as we are today, so to talk about democratic activity and so to deepen knowledge, but we never know what a drop of water can do. So this is the drop of water effect, like the butterfly effect. Right? So so to say, this is a tsunami. So I sometimes have the impression that when we touch ourselves with something new, with a new insight, a new question, when we feel ourselves, how to say, wake, so that we are not absolutely sure. So this feeling that we experience when we research, that is something that we touch the source of many. The interesting thing is to have today so experienced, so with you both, a way of life of research that you both carry so many years, and without leaving never the road. You are always on the road. Thank you very much. So, okay, and you are invited for the next time, so for the next clinic. Okay. Thank you also. I would like to thank also Fran Ugalde for assisting us, for his so for the quality of her work, so giving us so facilities of we can communicate. Thank you to the Zoom. And also I would like to thank APLA and the organizations, Tirando Blanc and other corporations and universities who give us their support for carrying the clinic every month. Thank you very much. So, and see, we can see us next month, so at the end of June. And we close the activity of the clinic before July because it's the holidays, so academic holidays, so to the next year. So thank you very much, and you are invited for the next clinic. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.